sometimes right when we open the hole, it's like, well, that sucks. Now we got to tell the owner like $20,000 change order. And it's not even our fault. It's just like, we can't totally predict what's underground in that kind of way. So yeah, for me, it's sort of embracing being comfortable with the uncomfortable. I think that's one big phrase that I try to remind myself about too. Yeah.
Hey, creative. Are you ready to discuss profits, the money, the ways to make it happen? The Profitable Creative Podcast is for you, the creative, how you define it. Videographers, photographers, entrepreneurs, marketing agencies, you get it. CEO of Core Group and author Christian Brim interviews industry experts, creative entrepreneurs, and professionals alike who strive to be creative and make money at the same time. Sound like you? Tune in now. It's time for profit.
Welcome to another edition of The Profitable Creative. I'm your host, Christian Brim, the only place on the internet where you will learn to turn your passion into a profit. I am joined today by Lance Cayko of F9 Productions. So welcome, Lance. Sorry, I'm rambling.
All good. Yeah. Thanks for having me. The psycho part must have threw you off too a little bit. I don't blame you. Some people have a lot of trouble just going, you make them uncomfortable. They're like, do I have to say it? Well, I
don't want to call you that. Yeah, I'm totally fine with it. I would be called, I am called Cayko, so no relation, however. So tell me in your own words how you arrived here. What's the brief synopsis of your entrepreneurial journey?
Okay, I'll try to be as brief as possible then. 13 years old, I quit farming with dad and went and decided to be a carpenter. From 13 to 21, then I explored about every trade in the construction field besides mechanical, electrical, plumbing. Went to trade school to become a general contractor. Actually loved school for the first time after doing that. Because I think because I got to choose what I wanted to do, and I'm very much a type A, first child, first grandchild, leader, got to just my way or the highway for me anyway. And then I was like, well, I know how to build. This is cool, but it seems like the architect gets the client first. What if I went to architecture school? So I applied to North Dakota State, 70 miles north, got accepted there. Again, excelled at school, graduated top of the class, got an internship in Boulder, laid off 9 months later. And that's what started the trajectory of me going the serial entrepreneur route, starting my own firm. And then we started in 2010 to 2017. We kind of hit that 7-year mark. And, that 7-year mark is significant if you're an entrepreneur and a business person. Most businesses fail within that 7 years. So we got to year 7 and it was like, my business partner and I go, we should record this somehow. I mean, we've established ourselves in the worst time possible during the Great Recession. Yeah, very, very difficult to do. And amidst sort of also all the media and socio-cultural kind of dogma at that time, especially, and still kind of now, about being, anti-capitalist, anti-entrepreneur. And it was like, and a lot of it was coming from my generation, millennial sort of thing. And we were like, this could inspire people to do what we're doing. I want more entrepreneurs. I want more people taking responsibility. Yeah, you do too. I mean, and so then we started the podcast, Inside the Firm podcast, told the whole story from episode 0. We still do 2 weekly shows, one kind of like this, and then one where it's just me and my business partner on. And then I started guesting on podcasts to try to get the word out there about that and everything else we do, and then just network with people. So that's what brought me all the way here.
I love it. Okay, so I'm going to ask you a question that you may or may not have considered. So the name of the podcast is The Profitable Creative. I have a certain thing in mind when I say a creative entrepreneur. Do you identify as a creative entrepreneur?
It's obvious. I think entrepreneurship by itself actually is a creative endeavor. I've really tried to stress that to folks who, look at me as an architect, and they obviously go, oh yeah, you're like an artist of buildings. You must be super creative. You must be able to sketch like crazy and you just draw things out of your head. And we can. I mean, we're award-winning architects and all that other stuff. But as I've put on the other business hats, being a general contractor and starting and forming a general contracting business, starting a real estate business, starting a nonprofit community garden. All of those endeavors have just proved to me that actually it's a creative being a creative, a profitable creative is not just about being a creative first. I think it's about an entrepreneur. You have to be creative at every moment. I mean, some people also ask me all the time, I get this question a lot, who want to maybe listen to our show or just network with me in some certain way, and they want to start a business. So I get a lot of people that come to me for advice like that. I have coffee and like, when's the best time to start a business? And I go, during a Great Recession or a Great Depression. And it freaks them out because you wouldn't think that's the answer, and they go, why? And I go, thank you. I was hoping you would say that, because I just reflect on myself and Alex, and it was like every day we woke up broke, hungry, scared, in a corner, and going, every day we had to be creative because of that. It's kind of like taking a piece of coal and putting it under a lot of pressure on it. And then we all know what happens after that. And then it becomes a diamond. So, that's sort of my answer for the creative part of it.
I love that, because I think you're right in general that things going easy or predictably maybe doesn't present challenges and therefore doesn't really produce any change, right? I think that, you shouldn't be in a constant state of hair on fire. That would mean that you've got problems. But there's got to be some balance of like you're successful, but you're still pushing the envelope, right? You're trying new things. You're starting new businesses. You're branching out possibly into verticals, which it sounds like you did. But I don't think, and my experience really does say this from myself and my colleagues that, have reached a certain level of success in business, there's not any satisfaction in that, right? I mean, there's satisfaction in having built a business, but that fire of being an entrepreneur doesn't go away. I remember a conversation with my wife where she was asking, I think the question was like, how much is enough? Like, when are you going to stop? And I said, well, did Rembrandt stop painting? Did Mozart stop composing? No, I mean, it's just what we do, right? And so, you have to balance that with, maybe it is a nonprofit where there's not any commercial intent, right? You're not trying to make money off of it, but it still feeds that entrepreneurial fire of yours.
Yeah, you're right. We don't stop. I mean, look at Elon, right? He can't. He's just addicted to it. It's just like it's so addicting. It's like the best addiction, I think, besides maybe something healthy like fishing or hiking or, sport hunting or something like that. But like, yeah, I know. And as you were pontificating there, Christian, I was kind of reminiscing how exciting it is to start a business. You're coming up with the logos, you're coming up with the hooks. It's scary like crossing a log on a creek. It's kind of like that, right? Where you're going teetering back and forth, but you can see the end goal and you know how to get there. It's incredible. And I get a lot of, I work with, like in my nonprofit, for example, I have, it's mostly retired folks that are on my board, which makes sense. They have extra time and stuff like that. And one gal was a planner in a city, right? And so just very analytical, very by the book, has never stepped out of the comfort zone of, because I even asked her I asked her what I'm about to say. I asked her because she had so much pushback when I just instantly jumped on the opportunity to turn the garden into my own nonprofit. And I was just, there was no fear about how I knew how the legal processes worked and everything. And I go, Prue, have you ever had a business? She goes, no. And I go, you're a planner, right? She's, yep. I spent my whole life in government. And I went, oh, okay, I get it. Yeah, like how much is what we do? We're born with it. I think there's actually a lot of it because like my dad, who raised me, but is not my biological dad. I found, and I didn't find that out until I was 33. When I found my biological dad, when I was 33, I'm 41 now. My dad, I really had a good rich dad, poor dad environment.
One of my favorite books.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, I made my children read it last summer, and then they had to write a report, and I paid them to do it. Like, so critical, you know? So the dad who raised me was not my biological father, was the poor dad. Never took any risks, just worked on the farm, and God bless him for doing it. I wouldn't be here. I would not be the person I am. I probably wouldn't be talking about the garden so much. I wouldn't be that trying to do urban farming if I didn't grow up on that place. Love the man. But then when I found my dad, who was my biological dad, and this was after I had several companies in place and going in that direction, I was like, it was like, oh, did I just get the DNA, the entrepreneurial DNA? He's a multimillionaire. He has all these companies in Brazil. It was like astounding to me how similar we were in the professional world without having any of that sort of contact in that kind of way or influence. But at the same time, it's interesting. I'm like, but I'm also very happy about growing up in the environment that I did with the poor dad and then being pushed in that direction of like, I hated that we had anxiety about money. And so now I carry that through, and like, it really points to like one of my favorite quotes of all time. It's from a rapper, one of my favorite rappers, Kanye West. My mom and dad used to say growing up, they would tell me all the time, and it was a cope. Having money isn't everything. And I was like, oh, yeah, sure. Having money isn't everything, right? Like having these conversations is part of actually having everything. Having a meal with my daughter at the end of a long day is kind of have everything. Waking up and breathing. I get it, guys. But then Kanye finished it for me about 10 years ago, and he said, having money isn't everything, but not having it is. And I went, oh, that's right in my soul. Like that's why I'm also an entrepreneur, because it's for me, it's a reaction of growing up with the anxiety of not having money. And like, I want to be comfortable with what I make such that I don't have an anxiety. That's freedom. Like, I'm buying myself freedom from the anxiety.
Yes. And I've mentioned on this podcast, I don't recall the book, but it was a book on investment advice written for the layperson. And there was only one sentence that was bolded in the whole book. And I'm paraphrasing, but it basically said, you're wealthy when you don't worry about money. And that is very dependent on the individual, because someone could have $500,000 or $5,000 and not worry about money, or they could have $50 million in the bank and still worry about money. And I think part of it is being satisfied with what you have, because if you're not satisfied with what you have, it doesn't really matter how much you have, you're never going to be satisfied. But it's also about seeing the potential and not making an excuse for not pursuing what you want. Like, if you want a private jet, then you can have a private jet. Are you willing to make the sacrifices to do it? But, are you going to be satisfied when you get the jet? Like, is that, because you can get on that hamster wheel where you're just making more money or growing just to grow, and you don't have any satisfaction.
Yeah, there's a baseline of happiness. And I think I used to listen to NPR a long time ago. I don't anymore. I kind of shut off all media, left, right, up, down, inside out, all the different facets. But I distinctly remember this report that NPR was talking about at one point, and this is like a 10, 15-year-old article or something like that. There was a white paper and a study that was done at some university where they showed people's happiness after, at that time, like making $75,000 a year. Once they kept going past that, it never really increased that much, right? And it kind of pointed towards the baseline of what you're talking about, for sure.
Well, and that's interesting that you say that, because to a person, people that I've spoken with that have gone on mission trips or traveled to poor countries and encountered their people that who are destitute poverty compared to us in the United States across the board, do tend to be happier, right? And I understand what that article is saying is, like, once you have your base needs, your housing, your food, all of those things covered, it does remove a lot of anxiety, for sure. But in the same line of thought, I think it also has to be tied to your expectations, right? Because if you're living in a shack that has dirt floors, no plumbing, like a lot of people in the world do, they can be content in that. I don't know if it's comparing yourself to the people that you're around or what, but there's something around that expectation. Like none of us expect to live in a dirt hut with no running water or electricity. We would think ourselves poverty, right? But other people do. So how do you explain that?
Comparison is the thief of joy, right? And that's the tricky part about climbing the ladder as an entrepreneur is if you're successful, obviously, then you make more money, you have more fame, you have more friends, you have everything if you're a successful entrepreneur. I mean, it's just like an incredible vehicle to put yourself on. But as I climb in that way, we're attracting more and more higher end clients, more and more people where like they're coming out of places like California. For instance, one of Elon Musk's, his mentees ended up hiring us, and we designed his $6 million home in Boulder. It's one of the most modern, chic, cool freaking houses in Boulder. But you start comparing yourself just by proxy. And I'm not seeking to compare myself to that man. He's great, but at the end of the day, then you see like, wow, they're driving around 2 Cybertrucks and they get this awesome house. And then you go, so even with me, who right across the way, I've designed and built 2 houses for my family. They're like, as a percentage of the population, that's a very rare thing to do. And I'm going, so it's sort of this checking yourself, right? And you're going like, wait a minute, come on. I've designed and built 2 houses for my family. How many people even get to do that? Like, so you have to sort of check your thankfulness and gratitude in sort of backwards in that way, but you can't help it. You can't help but compare yeah.
You're 100% right. And I think as you travel in circles of entrepreneurs, I mean, I know this has been my experience that, you have success and then you see others that have had, like your success compared to theirs, strictly financially speaking, is inconsequential. And you're like, wow. And you can approach it with envy or comparison. But to me, I've kind of dealt with it by like, okay, let that be inspirational. Like, don't limit yourself on what you're capable of doing, because look at what others have done. And that turns it into a positive motivation. Like you said, or like I said, it really depends on, are you willing to make the sacrifices to do that? And as I've gotten older and I've seen opportunities, I'm like, yeah, I don't want to work that hard. Like I know what's involved now. I mean, when I was younger and I didn't know any better, then I probably would have jumped on it. But now I'm like, you kind of count the cost before you start building.
Yeah, I know. I was even at a micro level. So that's sort of like the macro part of it is, as a business owner, a CEO, a leader, somebody forging and being a leader in that kind of way, like those sacrifices are pretty huge. Right. I mean, there was one point like on our real estate development, where I worked 80 days in a row. I barely saw my children, and I'm talking seriously 80 days in a row. And my health suffered a little bit for it. I missed a family vacation, stuff like that, but then on the backside, in the end of it, it was like, oh, then that's what actually bloomed our construction company, which is now even more profitable than our architecture company. Because and it was partly because of that sacrifice I made. I was like, I couldn't actually get comfortable with the fact that I did that and not get something super positive out of the end of it. Like I've been on this law of polarity kick for the last 2 years. And like about a year ago, I was having dinner with my children. I have a son and a daughter, and son is like 19, daughter's 15. And so we can have these a little bit more intellectual conversations with them. And they asked, I go, do you guys know what? They're like, what makes you sad? What makes you glad? And I go, well, what gets me really excited actually? And I go, what? And I'm like, when something negative happens to me, like when something bad happens. And they're like, what? And I was like, well, if something bad happens to me, the universe works with positivity and negativity. It's called the law of polarity. Like it's physics. I know something good is going to happen. And I go, when do you think I get most like anxious or sad, worried? And they go, I don't know. And I go, when it's just good. Like when it's just everything's going too well, especially on a construction site. We talk about this, I swear, every single project that we start to build. And let's say they, if the 3 in a row go really well, and we go, something's going to fall, right? Like something's going to be pulled out here. And then there'll be some that we start. And like right when we dig the hole, in Colorado, the soils are just awful. Like they're very expansive. So we have to do all kinds of stuff for the foundations. Sometimes right when we open the hole, it's like, well, that sucks. Now we got to tell the owner like $20,000 change order. And it's not even our fault. It's like, we can't totally predict what's underground in that kind of way. So yeah, for me, it's sort of embracing being comfortable with the uncomfortable. I think that's one big phrase that I try to remind myself about too. Yeah.
Today's episode of The Profitable Creative is brought to you by Core Group. Are you tired of doing it all yourself? Do you feel like you have no plan? Let Core Group guide you to build the business of your dreams. Core Group, your go-to accountant for creatives.
There isn't a lot of comfort in being an entrepreneur, although my experience is that we sometimes intentionally and unintentionally create discomfort that's unnecessary. Your statement about soil just reminded me. I have a dear friend that's an architect, and he spent over a decade working in London, and he moved back here to Oklahoma City. And I was asking him, what's the difference between building here and there? And he was like, well, I had a job site that was shut down for a year because we reached a plague pit. And I'm like, a what? And he said, well, it was a burial site for plague victims. And so they had to shut the whole thing down to come in and, sterilize it, guys in hazmat suits and all this. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, you don't get that here. You might get red clay, but, you're not going to get plague pits.
Doesn't it? It sort of has like a strangely nice ring to it.
Yeah,
plague
doesn't
pit.
it? Well, that's the English. That's the English for you. They always put a nice spin on things. It has to be prim. So tell me, what is the thing that you've accomplished that you're most proud of? Business, personal, whatever.
Oh man, I've stuck to my word of not laying anybody off. And I was just telling my girlfriend this, who's not an entrepreneur, and she actually venerates. She's an architect too, but she's not an entrepreneur. She's actually very happy being a driver of the cogs, right? She's a project architect and all of that. Now she's a professor too, actually. We were talking about this. I was like, well, where that comes from about not laying anybody off too comes from that negative. So like when I moved here and I got that first internship, I lasted 9 months and then I got laid off. And it was because of bad entrepreneurs. And they were architects, but they were definitely not entrepreneurs. They were just architects, but they had a business, right? It's like, that's part of the podcast too, is we're really trying to encourage the architect community. Like, you need to embrace being an entrepreneur. Like, come on, you're already a creative individual. So when they laid me off, I never forgot that sting and how awful it felt and how helpless I felt. And then I called my grandma sobbing, and I went home to my wife we just had a newborn. I'm like, just after graduating at the top of our class and thinking the whole world was set up for me to just, like, all the dominoes were there to knock it down and everything. So that has been, like, honestly, my number one goal that I've been proud of, to be able to uphold for now 15 years, is I've never laid anybody off because we don't have enough work. And it ties into the sacrifice, actually. It's me and Al when we first started up the business, not overpaying ourselves, sacrificing even some salary here and there, and just paying ourselves the lowest amount, and then doing, and then after that, trying to get enough profit at the end, then we kind of make it up for ourselves and, pull dividends and all of that. So that's probably my proudest part of it, actually, is really creating jobs for people out of nowhere, because we had no contacts either when he moved here. It really was a true architectural startup. Like, a lot of architects are very well networked, and that's how they do it. They're glad handing at museum events, at the AIA or whatever. We had nothing like that. We had to just forge the path. It was like pushing a boulder up a mountain every single day, but it made us so strong and so lean and so mean. Now that we're kind of primed in that way, and we have a network and things are flowing a little bit better, And then, the other way we've been doing it recently is through the serial entrepreneurism. And that is like, we have a construction company and our architects can bill against the construction company to do construction administration. It offsets how much I have to pay myself for F9. So I can, like, if I need to, at certain points, if I need to shrink that down a little bit just to help cash flow, I know I'll make it up in the construction. Like, we have an ecosystem. And that's,
you're the Rockefeller of construction. You've got the vertical integration down. I love it. You do the development, the construction, and the architecture. I guess next you need a real estate agency.
Yeah, right. I go after that license for sure.
I love what you said. One, about not laying people off, because I think, one of the things that made me more cautious as an entrepreneur is realizing that it's not just my family that I affect, but, the 20 or so people that I employ and their families. And like that's a weighty thing. And it should weigh into your risk-making decisions, because I feel a certain responsibility. Like, I don't want them to go without because I was stupid, right? The other thing I liked about what you said is these architects that aren't businesses. And I think this can apply to any entrepreneur, because it seems that entrepreneurs start a business because they have a skill. Not always, but, a big chunk of the time. And they identify with that skill. It may be a profession. It may be architecture. It may be accounting and law or engineer or a coder or whatever, or, a videographer or a cinematographer. You could identify with that first. I cannot remember who, I think it may have been Perry Marshall that said this. He said, you have to think of yourself as an entrepreneur first with a certain set of skills. So Lance, you're a entrepreneur with architectural skills, which is completely different than saying you're an architect. Every
time I do one of these a podcast like this and I guest on a show, I feel like I pull out one good phrase, and that, like, one new phrase. There's been a lot of good phrases. One new good phrase, and I'm going to use that from now on. I'm an entrepreneur with architectural, carpentry, general contracting, real estate development skills. Like, that's fantastic. Yeah, it's right. Yeah. Well, I'm going to look it up. I think you mentioned the name. Who
Perry Marshall. He's the author of 80-20 Marketing and Sales. His is an interesting story. He's my age, maybe a little older, but he was educated as an electrical engineer and went into sales of product in the electronics space, and then just became a full-time marketer. So he's not your typical marketer. He's very analytical, and he does deep dives on fractals and mathematics, and it's interesting guy. I think you kind of hinted at this, but I wanted to dive a little deeper into it. What did you learn about money growing up?
Yeah, the hint, right? The having money isn't everything, but not having it is. Yeah. What I was taught about money is that, and then I was raised very Catholic. I'm still very Catholic, but one of the things that they, that is literally, money is the root of all evil. So that's kind of true. Like it's tied to it, I guess. I mean, I always try to think of can I twist that phrase to suit my brain a little bit better? And the way I think about it is like, it's tied to it, but it's just money. Like, we have to have some kind of means of exchange. We can't just barter all day long. I can't trade a building for a car or stuff like that in that kind of way. So there was a big negative aura around money when I was growing up.
So like having money was somehow immoral or evil?
No, it wasn't actually just having capital. It was the pursuit of capital.
I see. Okay.
To get to the point where then you could have the things that you wanted without having anxiety around having the things, like over leveraging yourself. So they had some good lessons in there and something like that. It's like we were talking about credit scores the other day in the office, and my dad, it brought up the memory of my dad and his credit score, which was very good. But then as I started to have my own credit score and use it and leverage it to become a real estate developer and a real estate investor. It takes a lot of capital. It takes a lot of risk. I mean, you're just putting your butt on the line for like $3 million. Our loan is like $3 million. It's crazy. It's a large amount of money before they printed all the money in the pandemic, by the way. So now it's probably like $6 million. And he would brag to me all the time about his growing up, like, I have this 820 credit score or something. And finally, maybe like 4 or 5 years ago, it came up again at like Thanksgiving or something like that. And we're like, everybody's kind of just me, my brother, and my dad like are talking about somehow credit scores. And I go, yeah, mine's like, I don't know, upper 700s or something like that. And they were like, oh, what? Ours is like 820, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, that's because you don't use it. Like, you're not leveraging it. Isn't that kind of indicative of like life and just in general is like somewhere in the goopy gray middle is really the answer and like the magic. It's not this left, right, up, down, black, white, extreme in any other way. It's picking from those extremes and then forming this goopy gray ball that really makes sense and helps the world grow.
I think that the reason why most people have this anxiety around money is fear driven, right? And it's fear of, doing without. I think that anytime you're motivated by fear, I mean, it's not that that's a bad motivator because it can motivate you to do good things. But to me, fear is more closing, like it shuts down options. It keeps you from looking at possibles. Like I said, the people that I know that are uber successful, the money hasn't changed who they are. I think it amplifies who they are because you see all the stories about lottery winners and they're broke again, a year or two later. Because why? Because they didn't change, right? They remained who they were. And I think that when it comes to being profitable as an entrepreneur, as a creative, it's really about getting comfortable with your relationship with money and being intentional about it. So many people are reactive with money because they're not being intentional about it. They're working from some deep emotional space that they don't really even understand what it is, right?
Right. It's the fear. I mean, the fear just kind of drives, especially now too, with like the hyper politics and weird environment we're in, just globally and all that kind of stuff about how it. I think you're right that it's a fear. It's like misplaced intentions because of the fear sort of idea. Yeah.
As Yoda said, fear leads to the dark. What is it right now in your business that is on your mind first thing when you wake up or on your mind when you're going to sleep? I call it a struggle, a problem that you're trying to solve. What's that focal point for you right now?
Well, I'll answer it in reverse. I actually go to bed without having to think about all the businesses and everything. I have successfully trained myself to shut it off at about 5 or 6 each day. Very important for anybody who wants to be that entrepreneur first with the skill. Because I think that's where some of the people with the skill first and the entrepreneur second start to go down a really bad spiral, is they can't shut it off. And you got to figure out, because discipline equals freedom. So you have to have you're disciplining yourself to have the freedom to not have to worry about that kind of stuff. And, I work a lot, probably about an average of about 50 hours a week, but I do also shut it off on the weekends. The last 2 weekends have been amazing. I went up to Minneapolis and Wisconsin and went up camping with my girlfriend. It was great. Meanwhile, running, several 7-figure firms, 3 7-figure firms. And then week before that, one of my buddies from college came out. And like you said, should the money amplify? The money should amplify you are. So we rented a side-by-side and went 4-wheeling up and down the mountains. It was fantastic. So I don't worry about that part. The waking up part, though, is akin to my routine. I think that's where also I think it's important for people to have a really strict routine in the mornings if they're an entrepreneur. You have to really center yourself and ground yourself and get ahead of the world. So the first 2 hours in the morning, I call them golden hours. And they're golden, like literally, because the sunrise and everything like that. But they're golden because they're quiet. And if you can get ahead of everybody else, then you're controlling the day for you versus So my routine is that, I wake up at about 5. go down to the kitchen, big glass of water with electrolytes, put on coffee, sit down and stretch and meditate and pray the rosary. Then after that, coffee's done. And then I'm at my desk for 2 hours from 5:30 to 7:30 before I have to take my daughter to school. And those 2 hours are so absolutely critical for getting ahead with the emails and addressing maybe some that fell through the cracks between after the hours I didn't address them, 5 to 7 and stuff like that. That way I'm ahead of everybody. And then I'm also trying to do my most creative tasks in those hours, with the help of caffeine, obviously. But like, that's where some of the best marketing ideas, some of the best architectural designs we come up with, when it's just really still and quiet. That's how I start and usually end the day.
I absolutely love that. The Perry Marshall calls that Renaissance time. He talks about having to have that space where you're not inundated with the tactical of, running a business or life. He's actually doing and I was this close to going, but I decided not to, that he's doing a seminar with Richard Koch, one of the Koch brothers in Portugal. And he was talking about Richard Koch's routine. He spends the first 2 to 3 hours of his day working on his 2 or 3 largest problems. And then he goes for a walk or a hike or whatever. And that allows him to, one, put his energy into the most important things, right? The things that need him to solve as opposed to others to solve. But then having the space to let his brain work on those problems subconsciously, right? So you're not continuing to try and process it in your cerebral, but you kind of engage your whole brain. That's why people get brilliant insights in the showers, because they're in a happy place and their brain disconnects, right? But being intentional with your routine and time, I think is awesome advice. So you mentioned previous wives. How did being an entrepreneur affect your personal relationships, specifically your marriages?
My first wife, it actually got a little better. Once I became an entrepreneur after getting laid off, it became a little bit better because I was making more money. And then I would try to make her happy by saying hey, yeah, if you fine, go get the clothes. I don't care. Here's $500. No big deal. So it made it a little bit better for a while. That relationship was just kind of doomed from the beginning. So it didn't matter if I had more money and or I could be more flexible with the children or anything like that. It sort of actually exacerbated some of the issues at the end of the day. Kind of like what you're saying about how the money just should increase you as a person, add on to it rather than sort of change you in that other way. For the second marriage, I think my last wife would agree, if she ever hears this, that what I'm about to say, and that is I think I leveled her up. So you mentioned that we should maybe one more vertical integration would be for us to be realtors. She's a realtor, so she got to sell our development, all the units that we didn't sell and stuff like that. There's a lot of books that I have brought home and when I do guesting or I guest her on my show, they'll send me the free book and then I'll read it. And they're usually very good. I'm pretty picky about who will be on the show and stuff like that, much like you. And and then I give her that book and it changes her life in a really positive way. Or she just sees me and by proxy felt much more motivated. Because there was a certain point, we had a blended family. And that's what ended up that was what brought us together. And that's what tore us apart, frankly. It was just the kids, they once they hit puberty and they weren't these cute little adorable kids anymore, then they didn't want to hang out with each other anymore. And before that, it was like Brady Bunch. We were just this 6-person family, which is kind of rare these days. We would go on these family trips, and people would just come up to our table. They'd go "Your kids are so well behaved. Thank you." And we're like, "Oh, thank you." Stuff like that. So I think that's probably how I affected her in that way. It was mostly positive, honestly, at the end of the day. I think we leveled each other up. And then, without her, when I was 30, because I would have been 33, 34, I didn't have the kind of capital I needed to buy the land that would enable us to build design and build this custom literal Brady house. And she enabled that. But then I did all the architecture and the engineering for free because it's my family, right? And she got to live, and she still lives in that house. And now that she has increased claustrophobia, just her own stuff, it's a house that's glass, obviously. I'm an architect who likes modernism. And the house is good for her health, So I since the divorce and having dated a lot actually lately over the past year, is like, I like to think even the girlfriends that I dated for a bit and then broke up, or dated for a little bit longer and broke up, had a really good positive effect on them. I'm just trying to, like, my preferred pronouns on LinkedIn are positive reactionary, right? Which is kind of indicative of like this whole conversation of me saying like all the negative stuff. I want to positively react to that. So I think that's how it affected it.
I've often said my wife is not an entrepreneur. We did work together off and on over the time in the business, but we each fired each other multiple times. I think as an entrepreneur, and I've only really come to see this after lots of years, that we've got to be kind of difficult to live with. I mean, like, we're not your normal people. We're not as predictable. That's got to be a strain on someone that doesn't think like that. But I appreciate your sharing your experience. Any final words? How do we reach you? How do we find you?
Well, I mentioned LinkedIn there, and I will link in with anybody. And my name is spelled Lance, last name Cayko, Cayko. I'm the only one on LinkedIn. If you're listening to this, you want to link in with me, I will accept pretty much anybody. If you want to listen to the show, go to InsideTheFirmPodcast.com. You can find it on YouTube, all the usual places. And if you want to follow what we do architecture-wise, or interested in ever engaging with us on a professional level, then you can go to f9productions.com, sign up for our newsletter. We send out one per week, or one per month, and keep everybody abreast. I
forgot to ask this. How do you come up with F9 Production?
It was when we started the firm, because we were such baby architects, like we weren't in firms long enough to get anything built. So all we had was like photorealistic renderings, and the software we would use to produce those at that time, the hotkey for that was F9. So you'd hit F9 and then it would execute the rendering. It was like, we're F9 Productions.
I love that. When I first heard it, I'm like, being from Oklahoma, I'm like, that's not a tornado rating because they only go up to F5. So I don't know what an F9 would look like, but that makes perfect sense. Lance, I very much appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us. If you like what you're listening to, follow the podcast, send us a comment, an email. We'd love to hear from you. For now, ta-ta.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of The Profitable Creative. Until next time, you money lovers. And don't forget, Profit First for Creatives is live via Amazon. Link below.